Hello and welcome to The New Frontier. As always, we have a very exciting guest with us today. Firstly, as always, we have Joe, but secondly, we have Rob Manning. So Rob Manning is an accomplished e-commerce and digital marketing leader with over 25 years of experience driving growth for leading global brands across retail, FMCG, and D2C industries. He has a proven track record in customer acquisition, retention, and brand building, and leveraging data and insights. And he's a tutor for the Digital Marketing Association and the John Moores University. I should say that I met Rob sitting next to him at a dinner at the Retail X event a couple of months ago, and we were having such a good chat about everything AI and e-commerce. So here he is. So Rob, how are you?
Welcome. Thank you. Good. Thank you. Thanks for the intro.
So it's been it's a wild and turbulent time in the world of Omnichannel, and as we're going to discuss new channels for people to sell on every day, but you've seen this evolution firsthand. 25 years experience, as we said at the intro. So what does Omnichannel really mean for you today, and why does it matter more than ever?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, right? And thank you for the 20 years. It's one way to make me feel old on a Thursday morning, but yeah, I mean, with that, so 25 years ago, started off in the world of digital. We were really only getting into the beginnings of sort of web email. CRM was sort of this acronym that had been developed somewhere, but nobody really knew what it was. And I've really grown up with the industry from there. And over that time, you sort of see a lot of shifts in terms of, kind of behavioral trends and patterns. And one of the key things being, kind of how we shop, right? How as individuals, as consumers, I think, one of the things that always stands out for me is that, omnichannel, I mean, we call it omnichannel now because it's a good buzzword, but it's really just describing human behavior. We are driven by particular need states. We will choose the channels that we shop in, based on our requirements, kind of, or what's particularly convenient at the time. And I think that's one of the places for me that companies in particular, we kind of fail to realize a little bit that actually, we can have the same consumer across multiple e-commerce touch points. We're not just focused, as individuals on, well, we just buy from one place to one place only, right? And we will flip from traditional, physical retail into digital retail. The advent of the mobile phone, okay, not new news on that one, but, kind of has been the friend in our pocket that allows us to, research and do price comparisons, kind of while we're in a physical store. So, over the years, we've developed, to use the technology to our advantage, right? So that for me is really why omnichannel is so incredibly important, because it's just about how we shop. So if we can start to understand, those journeys more, if we can start to understand, kind of the different channels and when and why consumers are kind of engaging with us and purchasing from, kind of at various times, it means that we can create a much, much better and a much, much richer, kind of customer experience. It means that we're going to get more insight, we're going to get more data, we're going to be able to build a much better and a much stronger relationship with our consumers, which is going to have an impact, from a retention perspective. And we all know the cost of acquisition is going up and up and up and up, right? So retention is just becoming hugely important. So I think the other area is that, what we're seeing and what we see in a kind of an ever-increasing way is more and more channels, kind of coming into the marketplace. So, like I say, when I first started, pretty much we had, physical retail, and then e-commerce started to come on board. We started to buy certain things, books, CDs, DVDs, and then bigger and bigger and bigger, kind of elements we start to buy. Then all of a sudden we had, marketplaces really kind to kick off, Amazon obviously being, biggest, kind of particularly in the world I'm working in. And then you've got, the likes of Meta starting to talk about being a marketplace, and eBay, and now you've got TikTok Shop. And now, kind of as we start to kind of go into this this next development of digital, kind of even new and more kind of interesting channels starting to come up.
Yeah, and this is actually a really interesting time to talk about this because, we're seeing kind of the writing on the wall. AI is changing a lot about consumer behavior. AI is changing a lot about how we purchase things, how we research things, how we get to the actual end product. And one of the major news from the sort of the start of the year was firstly ChatGPT's integration with Shopify, which means that people will be able to buy products directly from their research in the in the environment of ChatGPT. Now, since yesterday, the Financial Times broke news that now they're going to take 2% cut out of that. No shockers there. So the question really is, how do you see AI and this kind of AI search and research behavior affect the whole omnichannel, matrix, and particularly from an e-commerce perspective? How do you feel that things are going to change from a consumer point of view and also from a brand point of view?
Yeah, so again, super interesting question, and I think AI is clearly going to revolutionize, kind of every aspect of digital, and have huge impacts, I think, in terms of not just the way we work, the way we shop, but kind of also kind of the way we interact and engage with technology, full stop. So I mean, I'll start off with the obvious answer, right, which is that it sounds like a mecca in some ways of being able to essentially have a conversation kind of with an AI agent, to ask it to go away, come up with ideas for kind of whatever it is that you're looking for, research it against a set of criteria, find out about availability, and then make the purchase without us really having to actually go and physically do a lot of that research ourselves, or even necessarily log on to an e-commerce website and go through all of the process. And obviously ChatGPT and Shopify kind of announced earlier this year, around about April time, kind of thinking it started to really kind of, I guess, show that that's again a key opportunity. Everything needs to be monetized, right? I think one of the big challenges that we always think about with digital is that everything's free, but doing anything in digital is actually hugely expensive and costly. So the taking a fee in terms of the percentage really doesn't surprise me, because companies need to find ways to monetize and commercialize kind of the kind of value and offerings that they're providing. For me, though, I think what we've got to be very conscious of is that there's always going to be new channels that are coming up, and we need to think about the adoption rate. Because if I think about my kids, I've got two kids, 10 and 14. They are 100% comfortable with talking to our house, through Alexa particularly, but through Google or any other of the home digital assistants, right? They walk into a room, they're quite happy to ask it to turn on a light, to find something to watch on the television, to schedule, to remind them, to ask them what the weather is, to have a full-on conversation. Kind of my son will literally sit there and kind of talk kind of to his phone in order to actually find stuff out and have a full conversation kind of in around that part. Which if I then look in terms of my parents' generation, they just look at that and go, what? And I think one of the biggest things that we need to be mindful of, and again, I'm going to come back to the importance of omnichannel, is that AI and e-commerce sitting within AI is going to be like an incredibly strong opportunity and a growth area going into the future, but it's not going to be like an overnight kind of let's flip over. What we'll see is twofold. One, some people starting to utilize that route, but the other is that then the impact on our more traditional e-commerce platforms. So example with TikTok Shop is key for me, which is that when we were running some activity of a previous company, we're looking at across TikTok Shop. We would run the live streams, we're kind of pushing out the content. We would see about a 35% increase in our Amazon sales over the period of a tick. We were looking at targeting. We're happy to do the brand discovery piece, kind of through TikTok, and start to understand a bit more of it, but they weren't there. Maybe they weren't quite trusting, or kind of didn't want to go through the setup or whatever it was from a TikTok Shop perspective. The trust, credibility was there with Amazon. So again, we just see that shifting and that moving from channel to channel. And I think for me, if we're not got our heads in the game in terms of actually how does each channel impact on each other, then some of those behaviors and trends is what we're going to miss. And I think as we start to go into the world of, kind of AI generating, kind of more e-commerce growth, we need to be thinking about actually what's the knock-on effect as well across each of our other channels, and how do we track and measure it.
So there's two really interesting questions I want to pick up on that. Firstly, on the OpenAI piece, I've had a lot of debates with investors and customers about how OpenAI is going to monetize, and I am firmly in the belief that there will not be paid ads in OpenAI, because I think that's going to ruin the search experience for customers, and they'll just go to Perplexity or Grok or somewhere that isn't just serving them a bunch of paid ads. And I think this referral fee is a really smart solution that basically, if you imagine that OpenAI can sign up all the major merchants, which I'm sure they will be able to eventually, that they will just have everyone on 2% referral fee, and they'll just select the best product and charge a flat fee, and they won't have this kind of bidding which you have in kind of the deterministic AI setting, where you have like the stack rank of blue links with some paid ones at the top. So I think it's going to be a new experience. I just want to get your reflections on like this entirely new business model that looks like it's going to evolve through AI.
And I really hope you're right, and I hope they don't go down the ad route. And I think, I hope that, there are more innovative ways in which people start to look in terms of monetizing, because, ultimately, I think you're right. It kills off both the experience, but also to a degree some of the trust and credibility in the information of what's coming out. Right, you suddenly start to question that if it's a pay-to-play space, well, what I'm getting is the people who are willing to pay the most amount of money for the information, rather than actually what necessarily might be the best, kind of response, kind of what it is that I'm looking for as a consumer. And I think that there is a challenge then from us, from if I sit on the other side in terms of then on the acquisition side, in terms of then kind of driving budget, everything starts to become more about kind of ROAS and return, and how do we start to then try and, I guess, well, not manipulate, but kind of, we should say, work with kind of the algorithms. So again, it starts to, for me as well, starts to kind of destroy some of the fabric of actually of what AI can do and how it can help. And I hope it doesn't get into the bidding wars. I mean, there are obviously many of the other platforms, that's the route they've gone down, is to, kind of start to push that through. And I think, one of the big challenges for me in that side is a lot of it's now, use our AI tools in order to do that media buying, kind of a message delivery, kind of on your behalf. And I think what that actually is resulting, and again, my opinion, but is a world where, when I first started, right, there was this very well-known phrase, it's still well-known now, which is that, 50% of your marketing works, the other 50% doesn't. You just don't know which 50%, right? And when you were TV, radio, door drop, it was really difficult to start to work out, okay, what worked, how, why. You had to be super in depth in terms of the planning to get the data. Where I feel digital has gone a little bit now, is the same way, right? So people you say, hey, use our AI tool. But what that actually means is you're just feeding the algorithm or the AI tool with some content and, kind of in key objectives. But again, you're not really finding out which part of it works and which part of it doesn't. So I'm almost getting back to this point now with, certainly on some of the platforms, is I know 50% of my ad spend is working. I just don't know which 50%. And I'm not sure I can actually, kind of put a whole amount of trust in the platform AI tools, because I know that they're there to do one thing, which is to drive the commerciality of the owner of those platforms, their commercial entities, for sure. So I think if the, like I say, the Gen AI tools, the agentic AI tools that we're going to start to see come out as they link into e-commerce, if they start to go down the same route, I think it will be a crying shame. And I think there is, the referral fee, the cost per transaction fee. I think for me that's a much smarter model, because it works for everybody. Because as a brand, you're only paying if you get the sale, and from an AI perspective, they're going to get kind of a revenue streaming coming from let's say, the major players.
I actually want to pick up on a slightly different kind of, I guess, tangent of this. So obviously we talk about omnichannel, we talk about, as you said, the 50%, which exactly 50% did work. In the last, I would say 15 years since I started working in digital marketing, I saw definitely the narrative around, okay, well, above the line channels like TV, papers, radio, etc., are kind of getting shifted off from like the digital equivalents, and they are sort of decreasing their influence. There's seeing decrease in usage and so forth and so on, which it kind of makes sense from the way behavior shift has happened. But now when we talk about AI and AI footprint and how your brand can get discovered, we're talking about brand footprint and like being recommended by let's not the word respectable, but well-known publications, and basically having that spread of mentions. So do you think that actually we are going back a little bit to sort of like mass media to actually influence these AI engines and sort of the recommendation patterns?
So, I think that, it's a good question, because it's, again, from the AI perspective, how are they making judgments, I guess, in terms of what's good and what's not, and what's credible and what's a high quality piece of information, and where should they, kind of drive it through. And I think that's where, again, Max, a lot of your presentation again on that, kind of Amazon Seller Summit really started to make sense, certainly for me as well, which is actually, kind of how do we start to drive and feed, kind of the AI models with the content, kind of that we want them to, kind of understand about who we are and what we offer, and, kind of how our products differ, with the right substantiation points and the right credibility piece behind it. So that we don't have to, kind of try and, kind of rely back on, kind of actually broad brush spreading out some messages to hope that things start to get picked up. I mean, I think, there is always, I think for me, particularly when I think about from a marketing perspective, I always have in the back of my mind, same with SEO, and I'm assuming it'd be the same in terms of the AI piece, which is that, if you do what you do really well as a brand, if you make sure that actually, kind of the content you're creating is good, high quality, well researched, well substantiated, particularly in my world of health and wellness, right? That it's got the right, kind of key points and substantiation points to sit behind it. If you're making it targeted and relevant to the main audiences that you're looking for, if you're trying to find stuff which is interesting and engaging, then almost that, kind of indexing piece, whether it be through AI bots or whether it be through, kind of other media channels, to a degree, kind of will start to happen and start to push your content out and start to get featured and pushed out. So, what I'm hoping is that it's like actually just, in terms of core basics of marketing strategy, which is like really understand your audience, really understand, kind of who you are, what you're offering, why you're differing, make sure you create good and engaging content around it and start to push that out across your own channels and feed it into, kind of into the AI models and feed it across, kind of as far and wide as you can from a digital perspective, then, kind of, I think you're going to be, you're going to start to be featured and pulled up, just by doing things well.
Yeah, I was having a chat with a reporter from a major publication about this, and she was asking me how, for luxury brands, how this is all going to work. And I was saying that actually these luxury brands are going to have an advantage, to Joe's point and your point, Rob, which is if you've got a long history of excellence, the AI is going to pick that up in their world model, and they're going to recognize that brand name, and it's going to be important. And comparatively, in the deterministic AI, like A9 on Amazon, for example, when you type in a keyword, best zero sugar snack, it doesn't care if one of these brands, maybe a bad example, or like best handbag for women, it doesn't care that you have Dior who've been around for 100, 200 years compared to some random Chinese seller. It is just going, okay, what's the best sales velocity? What's the best reviews? What's the best, what are like the 30 metrics which I can rank these different products on? I'm going to show you the best one from my like quite simplistic algorithm. So I think legacy brands will have an advantage in this GPT era and this
Did
LLM
you
era.
just call the A9 a simplistic algorithm? I just want
Compared
to
to compared to the reasoning model that people are going to be using to shop on ChatGPT next year, 100%, right? But I wanted to shift tact a little bit because you said something else really interesting, Rob, which I wanted to kind of pull the thread on a bit, which was at your previous company, you were running TikTok campaigns, and that was kind of driving Amazon sales. Oh, that, you know, omnichannel is really complicated. And I know you kind of said like 50% of it's working. I just don't know what 50% of my marketing spend. But how do you start as an organization to try and measure this and attribute this across all of the different places that people are checking out?
So yeah, so I mean, it's. I was fortunate in, let's say, in some of the companies I've worked for and with over the years, where I've had the opportunity to put e-commerce infrastructure in, on digital infrastructure in, and I've also worked in organisations where there has been a lot of legacy in kind of digital infrastructure that sits within. So it is much easier, you know, kind of when you're starting to build out from scratch. Because you can start to sit there and think, okay, well, what are the channels we're looking to do? What role are they going to be playing? How are we going to be utilizing it? And how do we start to join the dots up from the beginning from a data perspective? You know, how do we start to pull everything into a central platform, some kind of CDP or, you know, kind of somehow of warehousing within which we can actually start to capture the information across all of our channels? So that for me is the place to start, and then it's really starting to use that data to start to think about, okay, well, you know, what does the customer journey look like for different key segments and different personas that we've got that are coming through? So again, back to some of the marketing basics a bit, really, but you know, kind of they still stand true in my view as we start to go in, and then we can start to understand a lot more in terms of those interrelationships. At what point do people shop where? What might be influencing it? What might be some of the key factors that are starting to come through? I think one of the biggest challenges we've had, I mean, this has been a goal from a marketing perspective, and you know, if you want it, you know, it's really moving from across content and channel, you know, into the world of sort of hyper personalization. And again, for me, this is a real strength that AI has brought, you know, kind of to us, which is we've been talking about this for years. You know, there's been talk about a single customer view since the beginnings of the world of CRM, probably about 20 years ago. But I don't think it's really been almost achievable, you know, particularly in consumer marketing, until pretty much about now, you know, where we're really now starting to be able to utilize, you know, kind of the AI and the machine learning models in order for us to actually consume large volumes of both structured and unstructured data to actually pull out patterns, trends, and start to build out our understanding in terms of what audiences are doing and how they're behaving. It's been way too intensive, I think, previously for many organizations, or too costly to engage with, you know, the companies that can provide it. So I think that's one of the key challenges when you're working in terms of a you know, kind of an organization that's already got, you know, kind of legacy platforms. Then, you know, you're in a different world of, you know, kind of data integration pain. But again, for me, it's always coming back in terms of, okay, well, what data sets do we have? Where are they sitting? How do we start to get an understanding? Can we start to integrate, you know, kind of what do we need to be utilizing? And I remember doing a project years and years and years ago now, you know, kind of for a large telecoms company, which was essentially building a middle platform from a data perspective. So they had multiple different areas, B2B, B2C, different retailers, you know, kind of they were selling online, offline, their customer services channel, you know, and ultimately there was 27 systems involved in any key customer touch point, right? So there's no way you could even start to think about, you know, pulling any type of insight or understanding from that, you know. So we built essentially a middleware piece, a custom built middleware piece to actually pull all this data in, but working again with the marketing teams, with the sales teams, commercial teams, to say, okay, well, what is important? What do we need to know? What do we need to really understand from the data? Like, and then how do we make sure that we're pulling that in and starting to, you know, kind of unify it, and enabling us to then start to do the analytics. So data is 100% the key, and really, you know, kind of starting from that perspective. In today's world, utilizing, you know, let's say a lot of AI and machine learning tools, it really helps in terms of doing that that analysis, and then it can start to help us build out those journeys and build out that personalization at scale. Then we can start to utilize those models in order to drive real-time personalization across websites. Then we can start to understand, by tagging everything, actually how do we build a journey for someone who's got a particular health issue, and make sure that that's front and center, and that key relevant kind of message that's being fed to them at every point of the journey. And ideally, kind of how do we then kind of cross that into our across all our e-com and retail channels.
Yeah, I also wrote about data hygiene and like kind of as the pivotal foundation of actually growing in the long term your any sort of AI acumen across the organization. But in terms of like, if we don't talk about, let's say, a bigger organization, if you are like a smaller e-commerce team, how would you start this piece? How would you start this journey in a non-complex, actually, I can do this from today sort of step?
So again, I mean, I guess from working in my previous one was smallish from an e-commerce perspective, very small team. It was sort of me and then me plus one as we were going through. So again, utilization of the tools that are available. There are a lot now, and if you're utilizing, kind of, I don't know, we utilize Shopify in terms of our e-commerce platform, which gave us access to a lot of the, kind of the apps we could start to then utilize, we could start to build it out. For me, again, it was thinking about, okay, well, how do we start to join it together? So, kind of, am I going to go down the route, kind of doing Amazon? If I'm going to go down Amazon, going to launch onto Seller Central. For me, my first point of call was to launch it using our own 3PL. So, kind of actually not to go down FBA and fulfilled by Amazon. Now, fulfilled by Amazon is going to play their algorithm much better, and kind of ultimately you move towards that at some point, or ideally get towards seller fulfilled Prime, because that Prime badge is key, as we all know. Subscribe and save and the other functionality that it opens up. But in the early stages, it meant that all of the order data was then flowing through my central, kind of inventory management and fulfillment management place, which one meant that, only having a limited volume or number of units when we first launched, it meant that I could be a little bit more flexible. So if Amazon started to take off as a channel, I wasn't going to be missing orders because I didn't have enough stock in the warehouse. If D2C took off, kind of, again, as that started to take off, we can make sure we've got the right element. So it gave me then that data from a stock and an inventory management perspective, but then also from a customer perspective. Now, you don't get all of the data that comes through, but you do understand, name, address, postcode, kind of. So there was enough for me to start to understand, okay, what is the crossover in terms of customers, kind of that are purchasing from one size to another. And then the same, when we launched TikTok Shop, again, utilize it through our own 3PL, because then that 3PL and our, became our kind of centralized platform where all the data was coming through from. We then started to sit there and say, okay, from a media perspective, let's understand what's coming through. Every piece of content we created, we created specific content themes. They were tagged, again, simplicity using UTM with Google tagging. So what was the content ID and how does that start to correlate? Pulling that into our CRM platform and CDP platform, which we use Klaviyo. So again, that then allowed us to start to then pull and ingest that data that coming in from GA over and from Shopify in terms of the UTM code. And then I could append to a customer record, ultimately what they were interested in. So, kind of whether they had a particular health issue, whether it was physical fitness, mental wellness, whatever it was, I could start to put that in and start to utilize that to then build out, kind of those profiles. And then we can start to utilize, again, those inbuilt tools to start to understand, okay, well, from a customer lifetime, repeat purchase perspective, propensity to subscribe, kind of, RFV or RFM in terms of then, kind of the recency, frequency and value modeling, which of these segments is actually looking like being more profitable, kind of, are they coming from Amazon D2C? Are they cross-channel shoppers? And then we could utilize that. So when I started to be able to identify someone that was a cross-channel shopper, when their email communications, they would get, links out to either, hey, we're running this on D2C at the moment, we're running this on Amazon, up to you, you take the choice of where you want to buy it from. People who are D2C and D2C only, they only saw D2C product lines and pushing through, and promos, Amazon only, we could push out to Amazon. So again, we could then start to like really utilize their channel preference, kind of in order to push it through.
Nice. So I guess it's been a tour de force of many changes that are happening in this world. As we mentioned at the top, you're also a tutor at the Digital Marketing Association and a lecturer at John Moores University. When you're teaching the next generation of marketing leaders, what do you tell them to focus on to stay relevant and be impactful in 5 years' time?
Yeah. So there's a couple of key things for me that I always talk about, which is, again, I'm going to come a little bit back to basics. And for me, although our channels change, the methodology and the behaviors and the way that we're working changes, some of the fundamental principles don't change. So, for me, I try to encourage, potentially new and kind of young marketers, understand the value of storytelling, right? Because I think regardless of the channel that we're starting to utilize, regardless of whether it's traditional retail, digital retail, AI commerce, actually storytelling pretty much sits at the understanding, the piece of it, and make sure that you understand, kind of what people are interested in, why are they actually going to be engaging with you, what it is that they're looking for, and make sure that you can kind of pull that together in terms of that narrative. I'm also encouraging, kind of a lot more, I guess, back to probably when I started. So when I started, because I was, kind of in digital from, the beginning, or very near the beginning, you sort of learn each of these disciplines as it started to come up. And I would say probably about 10 years ago, people really started to specialize down, kind of into a specific, all of a sudden we had SEO specialists and PPC specialists and social media specialists, whereas I think, now, because of the fragmentation that we've got in terms of journeys, the rate at which new channels and new opportunities come to market, I think actually the strongest and the best marketers are going to be the ones that actually have got a good level of overarching understanding of all the channels. Like, at least, not mapped to a pure generalist, but, understanding the disciplines, make sure that they understand data, right? They don't have to be coders. They don't have to be able to build, kind of AI models, but they need to understand what they are, how they work to a degree, kind of at top level, kind of, and to be able to understand the opportunity, you can start to do it. We need to be able to understand, kind of consumer experience, kind of how do you join it up end to end? How do we make sure that we've got a consistent, kind of flow? We need to understand creative, like I say, that storytelling piece, that narrative, the importance of imagery, key messaging, and copy and content. I think is going to become even more important, particularly as we start to move towards, kind of more AI side, which is like, kind of how do you create really, really good content? And then again, the performance piece. So, being able to really drill into that data, and understand what it's telling you and pull out those key insights. I think that's become more important than ever. So that we can understand what's happening, and end up not just, kind of chasing our tails, trying to, kind of do multiple things across multiple different channels and not really getting anywhere, or understanding why it's not working. And of course, get comfortable with AI. I mean, kind of regardless of what it is, it's here. It's a key part of it. It's not going away. Certainly from my perspective. So I think the marketers who really start to understand how to embrace AI and how to understand automation more are the ones which are really going to excel.
Well, that was going to be my last question, really. Do you think that marketing as a discipline will still be there in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years? Or do you think we'll get to the point where, as you said, this is all about leveraging large amounts of data, this is about getting great personalized copy across multiple different places? All of these things that marketers need to be good at are stuff that AI is really good at and will get increasingly better at. So do you think this is still going to be like an important discipline, or do you think, as a bit of a controversial question, that AI is just going to take over this entire thing and you're going to have one CMO and everything else is just automated?
Just automate a whole bunch of AI agents doing everything we need to do from a marketing perspective. No, I mean, it's a big question, and I'm not going to pretend to say that I know the answer to this one at all, because I think only time will tell. But if you look back across the years, they said at the point that design software came into marketing and kind of creative design, that was going to be it. That was going to be the end, kind of designers as we know it. but it wasn't. Kind of in actual fact, what it did is it elevated and made the designers could do even more interesting, better stuff, faster, more efficiently, that started to come in. So again, what we saw was the designers who embraced the new technology were the ones that then excelled, kind of through their careers and driving upwards. And I think if you look across multiple different disciplines, you can see similar patterns. So for me, I think certainly over the next, like you say, 5-10 years, yes, it's going to change significantly. Yes, a lot of the executional work is probably going to be done by AI. Yes, a lot of the, kind of research stuff can start to be done. But, I think in terms of, can AI start to understand the intricacies of human behavior, kind of more than a human? I don't know. I think that's something that, we'll wait and see what happens on that one. But I think that, I think it will dramatically shift and change, but there will still be, in my view, there is still going to need to be a human element, kind of that really helps us start to kind of drive, and it's going to be the marketers that know how to use AI to its best ability that are going to really see their careers kind of drive and succeed over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I was only asking that to be controversial, but I actually agree with you. I think these organizations will need less people fundamentally, or less people to do more work. But at the same time, those who adopt the technology will be the ones leading and driving, and you're always going to need a human to understand what technology to adopt and why X software is better than Y software, and why ultimately you should prioritize ChatGPT shopping over Perplexity shopping, or whatever like the big critical decisions are. Like, you're always going to need someone to make those big decisions for a company, and ultimately humans like dealing with humans. So I don't see a world in which a CEO does not hire a CMO, and then the CMO doesn't hire a bunch of people there in order to make those big decisions. But yeah, the grunt work will definitely be shifting. But Rob, thank you so much for coming. It is always a pleasure to talk to you. If you want our listeners to get in contact, reach out, do you want them to? And if so, how can they?
Yeah, I mean, always interested to, kind of hear from people, hear people's views and thoughts. Feel free to link to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Put out a connection request, and that would be great. But cool. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. We'll link that LinkedIn below, and yeah, they can reach out if they want to learn more about your teaching or your services. But thank you for coming, Rob. Appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, mate.